Today we're going to be talking about managing risk. My name's Caroline Carver. I'm a principal consultant at Three Black Cats. And it's great to have you join us for our session. We will be recording today's session to publish onto the website. It doesn't include your details, just me talking. If you have any questions as you go along, feel free to pop them in the Q&A and we will try and answer them as we go. So, when we think about managing privacy risk, we're going to consider risk in three places today. We're going to talk about privacy by design, how and when to do privacy assessments, and then also third-party risk management and why it is important. So first up, privacy by design. This might not be as familiar wording-wise for some of you. That said, it is likely a process that some of you are using in your organisation regardless. So privacy by design is a methodology that is used to ensure that privacy is bedded into designing new systems, new products, new processes for your business. So what it is about making sure that privacy is thought about at the requirements stage, and therefore isn't this add-on or bolt-on that we put on the end of a project when we have to do our privacy assessment and we suddenly remember privacy is important. Some of the reasons we do privacy by design, we're going to come to in a little bit. But we're saying privacy by design is an ongoing process. So it's not something we do once in a project or initiative. It is something we do throughout the life cycle. And it's likely something we should be doing throughout our BAU life cycle as well, which is just putting that lens of privacy over what we're doing and making sure we design and consider for it in the same way that we design for user experience, security, those sort of things, resiliency. It's just that extra lens that we put over it to think about privacy. Now, in New Zealand, privacy by design is not compulsory. It is highly recommended by the Privacy Commissioner, and it will make your life easier and generally make you more compliant if you have done it. But it is not set out in legislation that you have to do it. Now, that is different to some other countries. So if you were one of those businesses who is doing business into Europe or the UK, in their legislation, it is a requirement to have privacy by design processes in your business and use it when designing new things. Now, there was debate when we changed our Privacy Act in 2020 about should it be included. And we've hit that middle point where the Commissioner's website has quite good advice on it, etc. But as I say, it's not compulsory for you to do it at the moment. So why might we want to do it, however? So generally, organisations who do privacy by design tend to find that their privacy issues get identified much earlier on. And therefore they're generally less expensive. But it can also mean the difference between, in some cases, a complete overhaul of a project. So you don't want to find that out a week before go live, that actually there's something not quite right for privacy, and therefore we need to do a complete redo. So I'll give you an example of something, if we did privacy by design, that would come up, that costs a lot when it comes up late. If we were thinking with a privacy by design mindset, we would be thinking about the whole information life cycle, and we would think about how is our solution system process we're building going to deal with records that have passed their retention period and we need to get rid of them. Okay, so that would be some sort of functional requirements that we might want to build into our system that after X days, the record gets deleted. If you build that up front and think about it up front, it's generally not very costly to add it in. If you realise a week before go live that you have not done this, or even worse, a week after go live, then the cost of re-architecting and re-engineering that, what could have been a simple requirement is hugely expensive. And a lot of organisations then get faced with the prospect of the project's closed, I can't afford to make that change, I'm going to have to continue to run this risk of non-compliance in perpetuity because we just didn't think about it. And that brings us on to, if we use privacy by design up front, we're likely to build solutions that are generally more legally compliant to the Privacy Act, and also generally are more customer friendly, user friendly in terms of not being intrusive, not being creepy, and allowing people to have choice about how they want to engage with your system. All of those things are really hard, as I say, to add on later. So how do we go about privacy by design? So privacy by design originally came out of Canada quite a number of years ago. And it's based on 7 principles. So we think about these principles throughout our life cycle, and we need to think of it from the point we collect all the way through to when we dispose of it. So the principles it's based on are ensuring we embed privacy into the design. So that means we thought about it early, we thought about what functional and non-functional requirements we have for privacy, and we built them into the design. We then have a requirement about privacy being the default setting. So by this, we're talking about the fact that if I come into your product or service, it's inherently private unless I choose to make it otherwise. So if we think of an example, I come in, I create a new account on your service. I would expect the only person other than your staff who can see that account is myself. I wouldn't expect every other user of your service to suddenly be able to see it. Okay. If I then want to open it up and make it available to half the rest of the world, well, that's cool. That's my choice as an individual at that point, and you're welcome to offer that functionality. But the default should be that it is set to inherently private. So if you think about Facebook, that's most probably, at least historically, didn't have that. You create a new profile in Facebook, it used to be inherently public if you created it in New Zealand. Interestingly, if you create it in Europe, it's set to private. And the reason for that is not only is privacy by design required in Europe, but in the legislation, it sets out that privacy must be the default as well. So that's why it's different there. We need to think then about user-centric privacy. So this is making sure that individuals have control. The privacy is focused on them, not about your company, and they have complete control of what they can do. We then have requirements about, or principles about, being visible and transparent. So this comes in a few flavors. So this could be things like making sure the privacy settings are available to people and it's got good guidance about how to use it. But it also has a flavor of being visible and transparent about what information you're collecting and who you're going to share it with. So those pop-ups we talked about earlier in the week about, hey, this is going to happen if you didn't know, just FYI. And also things like making sure your privacy statement is visible, people can read it, it's written in a language choice that people can actually engage with, etc. One of the next key ones, fully functional. So we quite often hear privacy said no. Okay, now that's not a position we ever want to take as privacy, and that's part of privacy by design. One of the principles is that the system or solution can be fully functional with privacy as a consideration. So privacy is not the no place. It's about working together to be able to deliver the business need but whilst protecting people's privacy. So sometimes that might mean that we need to re-engineer something, but we still get the outcome that's required, but maybe in a different way, etc. But certainly it is not about privacy saying no. And we're going to talk more about that when we talk about privacy assessments as well. Goes without saying, end-to-end full life cycle protection. So that's talking about security, making sure the information is secure the whole time, from that point we collect it right through to the point we dispose of it, be it held by your organization, held by your vendors. It needs to be fully secure. And the last one, proactive and preventative. So that is about privacy settings and options, being able to sort of pre-think what do people want. And that's things like popping up warnings. Hey up, if you click this button, you're going to make your profile visible to everyone in the world. Are you still sure you want to do this? Yep, cool, click on. Your choice. We've told you what will happen. You are welcome to do that. And the preventative part is making sure that we have built stuff so that we can detect privacy problems. Now, that might be, we talked earlier in the week about staff browsing. It might be that we need to build logging so we know who is doing those sorts of activities that maybe they shouldn't be doing, etc. Now, we're saying if you gave these principles to your developers, likelihood is they will look at you and go, yeah, I don't know what you mean. Don't know how to deal with that, or a project team. So they do need to be unpicked a bit for them. What there is really good pattern books. So what's called design patterns. They're available of like good ways to build privacy and bad ways to build privacy. There's also some hall of shame in those pattern books. And those are publicly available. So definitely it is that coming in at the front door for it. Now, who normally does privacy by design will depend on your organization. So if we think about, we talked about Facebook, right? They have a huge privacy team. They have people called privacy engineers who are technical people who sit in the project teams and design for privacy. All of us on this call are not blessed with that larger privacy team. Okay, most of us have a privacy team of one. If we're lucky, some of us have point something of somebody. Okay, so it's about who should we encourage to sort of carry that mantle for privacy and throw that lens into the design piece. So it might be actually one of your architects or your data manager, for example, might have a real interest in this stuff and be able to provide that role. It might be actually that your privacy officer comes in at the beginning of projects and just talks through the design with them. Or it might be that that's something you want to outsource because it's not something you have the skills in-house for. Oh, so we're not going to talk much more about privacy by design, but that gives you a bit of an insight into what it is. So next up, privacy assessments. Now, I've called them privacy assessments rather than PIAs, and there's a reason for this that will become aware. So privacy assessments are usually a written document that gets done ideally before go live, and we'll talk a bit more about the timing in a minute, on an initiative. And what it does is it looks at the thing you have built or the business process change you have decided to do, and it considers how does what you have designed and built meet with the requirements of the Privacy Act. So in effect, it steps through the life cycle. So it goes, cool, we're collecting information. Yep, we're collecting this information. We have a just cause for collecting it. We gave a privacy statement to people and it's matches what we're actually going to do and it's nice and easy to read. We're then going to use the information plus some other stuff we've already got in our organization to do something. And then at the end of this, we might be going to disclose it to police, parent company, some other organisation. And then at the final bit, and we're going to delete it after this period. So quite often they're written based on the life cycle, so collection, use, disclosure, etc. Some organisations write them based on the privacy principles 1 to 13 and how what they have done matches with each of the principles. The downside of writing them in that way is that sometimes things get missed. And the reason I say that is it's really hard to think about so things like Principle 4, lawful and reasonable collection. It's quite hard to think of it as a sort of separate standalone topic. Whereas if you think about collection in its whole, quite often you will start and think about, that feels a bit odd. And you don't spend your time splitting hairs about, is it Principle 4, is it 2, is it 1? Actually, what we're trying to achieve is it is a problem or a risk to our business. What are we going to do to deal with it? Okay. So we go through, we think about all those effects on privacy, what we're doing, what the risks are due to what we have done, and then we have a risk table at the end of the document. And that risk table is the most important bit of that document. The rest is more a commentary of how did I get to this point? Okay. Now, I talked earlier about there being kind of a couple of options of templates for this. So the Privacy Commissioner recommends, and I would echo that as well, that it is a 2-tier process. So there's usually a privacy threshold assessment, which is usually sort of 10 to 20 yes/no questions to work out, does this project have any huge areas of privacy risk? So questions it will ask is things like, are you collecting particularly sensitive information? Does this involve minors? Are you using CCTV or facial recognition? Those sort of questions. So it's kind of like a triage to t-shirt size what needs to happen. Based on that PTA, that then can make a decision. Now, some of these, all of them will go to the privacy officer, who will then go, yep or no, we need to do more work. Some of you will have automated systems where it automatically determines based on answers, these are low risk, these are medium risk and need review by somebody, and these are high risk and we just need to get on and do more work on it. Which then kicks us into that privacy impact assessment. So that is that more detailed document I talked about. It can be written as like a Word document with lots of words in it and sections. Others of you will have it as a questionnaire in tools. So tools like OneTrust, Isano, those sort of tools can be really useful. Some of you will have a spreadsheet with smarts on it about what questions it asks. It doesn't matter how you get to the outcome as long as you get there. Okay. So generally depends on your organisation, but in most organisations, the PTA will take about 10 minutes for a project to fill in. The PIA will be, depending on what form you've got it in, hour or so if it's a questionnaire with multi-choice, up to, can be up to a week's work if it's a written Word form. Generally, we aim for about sort of 70% of projects should be on that PTA only, 30% need that more detailed assessment. Again, it depends on your organisation. If you are quite a low risk privacy organisation, you might actually have 99% of your stuff on a PTA. Okay. So we have those 2 tiers for it. And then when we have finished our PIA, I talked about it having that risk table. So that risk table, the idea of the PIA is to surface those risks up and then be able to look at how we can avoid or mitigate those risks, or is the business okay to accept them? And that's really worth saying. Any initiative you do will come with an element of risk. You'll never be able to build something that's completely foolproof. So give you an example. You can make the privacy statement abundantly clear. It can be super easy to read. It's got a giant flashing button. There will still be some individuals who will never engage with it and then be like, I wasn't told that. So, yep, I did everything in my power to do it. But we're not going to spend a fortune trying to get those last few people to engage with that privacy statement. So I talked earlier about the importance of doing this. So generally, good practice is that every initiative that your business is doing goes through at least the threshold assessment. Okay, so quite often it's built into your project life cycle as like a stage gate. Before go live, you will do your PIA along with your security assessment and other such things. However, if you leave it till that final stage gate before go live and something is found as a result of doing that PIA, it's really costly to make that change. Now, this is where privacy by design comes in. If you have done privacy by design the whole way through, your PIA should just be a document of what you have considered as you've been designing the whole way through, and the risk should all be suitably mitigated because you've designed for it up front. In reality, there are still organisations that when you get to the PIA stage have not done privacy by design, and there'll be a lot of shocks in it. Therefore, it's really important to start that PIA creation early. So as soon as your project has an idea about what are they going to do and how, even if it's only on post-it notes before they start cracking into building it, that is the time we need to do that PIA, at least the first cut of it, so that you can flag up any risks or requirements early on into that initiative. Okay. Now, who writes these things? So the ideal world, the business would write them, and then privacy would review them, review the risks, decide whether they're suitable or not, or whether they've missed anything. However, in reality, it might be that the business write half of it and privacy do the risk analysis. It might be that privacy write them all for your business. It doesn't matter as long as they get done at the end of the day. And that's what we're saying. It is not a legal requirement to do a PIA in New Zealand. However, it is a requirement to appropriately manage your risk. And it is a requirement to consider appropriate controls based on the risks to your individuals. So, no, you don't have to have it written down, but you need to have done the thinking. And the best way to evidence that you have done that thinking is to write it down. And that's why it is highly recommended as a process. So, what happens once we have finished our PIA? So we've written our PIA. It's come up with 10 risks. So that's what we're saying. Normally, I would expect PIAs to be coming out with sort of usually somewhere between sort of 2 or 3 risks up to about sort of 10-ish. I think the worst one I have ever done had about 40. And that was because privacy by design hadn't been done early. And even worse, it was across many different legal jurisdictions. So, yeah, it just ended up a bit of a mission. But sort of that sort of area of number of risks, you could group the risks together if you've got too many of them. So you could say, actually, all of these relate to a particular thing we're doing around collection. I will group them together as one larger risk and we will deal with it because we need to deal with it in one way. Mitigation is the same for all of these, so let's actually lump it together. So once we've got our risks, they need to be rated. So most organizations have a risk matrix of some sort. It's usually like a 5x5 multicolored kind of thing. Some organizations just have high to low. Doesn't matter what you have, as long as you rate your privacy stuff based on what your business rates the rest of your risks. Because the last thing you want is to rate differently and it get up to the senior leadership team and they go, whoa, oh my God, the sky's falling. And it's like, oh no, but it's used a different rating level. Okay, so it needs to line up, because when it goes up to your executives, they're going to want to balance the privacy risk with maybe a business imperative risk, first mover advantage risk, etc. And they'll be making those trade-offs. So it's really important that you have rated similarly so that they can make those trade-offs easily. And I would say that's something important in that, as I said, not every risk will be mitigated, but also not every risk will ever plan to be mitigated. It is up to the business, usually not the privacy officer, but someone in the business who has the delegated authority to accept the risk. And if they still want to go live and they have that authority to accept the risk, then that is fine. That is their choice. Privacy in most organizations is an advice function. They will tell you it's a bad idea. They will tell you some ideas of how to deal with it. But at the end of the day, if you are the marketing manager and you are going live and you've got that authority to go live, go for it. Okay. But completing a privacy assessment doesn't mitigate your risk at all. Okay, so if you write a glorious document, I know it's 30 pages long, it's a very long one. More of them I prefer to be like 2 or 3. It's 40 pages long. It's got a load of risks on it. And then I filed it in my drawer. The risk profile of your initiative has not changed any. Equally, if you don't verbalize those risks, present those risks, etc., to the right people, the risk profile is also unknown and certainly hasn't changed. So there's a really key piece of our PIA or privacy assessment process, which is dealing with the final document. Okay, so taking those risks, going either A, I've got the ability to risk accept that and I want to, or B, I see that risk and I'm going to get my project team together and we're going to form a plan to fix it. And this is a Jira ticket or Trello ticket or whatever you're using to make that action happen. And we will then track that and go, yep, that has now been done. The risk profile of this thing for your business has now dropped significantly to maybe a green level. Okay, but just the simple act of doing the PIA will not change your risk profile for it. Now, PIA processes, for some organizations, this privacy assessment process will be well trodden. Okay, so if you're a big organization, government department, they will churn through, I've seen some of them upward of sort of 20 to 30 a month if they're big and they've got stuff going on. Other organizations, they might do 1 a year, if that. And maybe give you an example, that might be for a small organization. We decided this year we're going to replace our customer database. And as part of that, we're going to review all things about how we collect and use customer data. Cool, we're going to do a one-off project. Other than that, we're not going to change things. Other places, because of their rate of change, will have tons of these things going on. But as I said earlier, most projects should be able to do a threshold only, 10 minutes-ish work for the project, okay? If your PIAs in particular, are becoming a burden to the business, they will try everything in their power to avoid doing them. So it's then finding that happy medium about how do you make a process to identify the risk to a level your business is comfortable with, whilst not inhibiting innovation. And that's where sometimes moving from a written Word document, which takes quite a long time to write and consider, through to things like automation with things like OneTrust, can significantly speed up that process. But the other piece is that importance of privacy by design. If you've thought about all this early, considered it, documented it, the PIA should be a walk in the park. It's just writing out what you did. If you have never thought about it before, PIA is going to take longer. But quite often, this is a pain point for privacy officers when they get as the bottleneck for these. Party risk management. So before we start and talk about third-party risk management, let's talk about what a third party is. So a third party is somebody who has, in this context, who has access to the personal information that your organization is responsible for. Now, that might be a vendor, could be Microsoft, AWS. It could also, though, be the cleaning lady who comes round and cleans up after you guys and has access to all your desks. It could be the person who is your security guard in the lobby who can overhear a bunch of conversations. It could also be that organization that you sell your data to. Now, I use the word sell loosely in this context. Some of you will be gifting your data to organizations. So things like that free use of Google Analytics, that is where you are gifting your data to Google. So that might be a disclosure. Okay, so thinking about all of those in the wider sense of what third party is. Okay, and we're saying it absolutely includes those vendors where the service is free. If the service is free, so I know Google Sheets or whatever else you have managed to find that is free to use on the internet, generally you are the product of that service. So by that, I mean they didn't gift it you for free for nothing. Likelihood is they're using your data, or there is some other catch that they are making money off it from you. So actually, to be honest, free ones, much higher risk. So why do we need to worry about them? So these third parties will each have their own privacy settings. Okay, so they will have their own privacy maturity as an organization. They will have their own breach process. They will have their own storage, their own controls, maybe even things down to, do they vet their staff? Do they let them work from home or the airport or the bus or wherever else it might be, etc. So they will have their own settings of how they expect privacy to work their organization and what the rules are. Unfortunately, because they are handling your organization's personal information, you are accountable under the Privacy Act for whatever they do with your organization's personal information. So if your third party is sitting on the bus, looking at your highly sensitive, HR file that they're fixing a defect on, or they're doing recruitment for you and they're doing it on the bus, the fact everyone can see over their shoulder and see who's applying for that job or looking at someone's medical information is still, the breach is yours. Okay, so you're accountable for something you maybe don't have direct control over. You haven't decided how you want them to work. Now, some organizations will take an approach which is, if you're going to be a vendor, in the main, you must use our infrastructure. So you must use our computer, our email address, our everything. Cool, that works to a degree. You try telling Microsoft that you have to use your computer. The answer's no. You're buying an email service from us, so we can't use your service to deliver ours. That doesn't work. So we need to think about how we consider these third parties. Now, at the moment, less than 20% of organisations, globally even, have a program to cover thinking about what their third parties are doing with their personal information. In other countries, not New Zealand, it is a requirement for the company who engages with these third parties to actually do due diligence over them, and also in some places guarantee their behaviour. In New Zealand, less so. However, you are still accountable for them. So most probably if you're accountable for it, you'll want to know what's going on. Okay. So when we think about our third parties, we think about what they are doing in relation to personal information. So we might have, for example, a research organisation we've hired. We want to do a customer sentiment survey. My favourite, always leaves you with some interesting privacy stuff going on. So we're going to do a customer sentiment survey. They're going to go out to a bunch of our customers and ask them a series of questions about how they feel. Okay, so they're going to collect a whole bunch of stuff. So we might have risks that we need to think about do we want them to collect that? Is it actually something we need? How do we make sure if they're working for us that they give our privacy statement? So remembering they are an extension of you, the privacy statement they need to give if they're collecting information for you is yours. Okay, the number that I see where it is, take job adder, for example, the privacy statement often is theirs because you haven't changed the default statement to be your own. Okay, so if they're doing it because you asked them to, privacy statement needs to be yours. Then thinking about risks around how are they going to use the information. Now, I'd like to think that they are going to use it solely for the reasons we told them to. Okay, so they're going to deliver us a cool as report on our customer sentiment, and they're going to present that and give us some nice stats and graphs, and we're going to send it up to our board. Great, tick. However, if they are also going to use it for their own purposes, so not what we asked them for, so maybe they're going to build a benchmark of how your sentiment is against other organizations. If they're going to do something like that, and it involves personal information being used in what they're doing, then that's considered a disclosure under the Privacy Act. And at that point, then they become responsible for it. Now, a couple of things. You've become responsible for the disclosure. So if you are having a disclosure, you have to tell people you're having one. It has to be connected with the reason the information was collected. Okay, so you would have to tell your customers, hey, as part of completing the sentiment survey, not only are we going to get a pretty graph, but hey up, you're going to be built into a dashboard forevermore. Going forward as well, come May, when that organisation, that third party gets that information for their own purposes, they're going to have to send them that privacy notice we talked about indirect collection. They're going to have to send that. So you need to make sure you have told your customers that their information is being shared before they get that privacy statement saying, hey up, we collected it. Otherwise they'll be really grumpy. So for most vendors or third parties, most organizations contractually say you cannot use it for anything else because they just don't want to deal with that disclosure. It's really complicated. So they say you must only use it for our purposes. End of. We might then want things about security. So we might want them to agree to follow a security protocol. So they might say we want them to be ISO, we want them to comply with New Zealand Information Security Manual. We might want them to be SOC 2 certified. These are all things we can decide. Maybe we want to assess their security. So maybe your security team want to have a check and make sure that actually their security posture is okay. Maybe we want to write into our contract with them what security we expect there to be at a minimum. We then think about retention. How long do we want them to keep it? So most third parties will write into their contracts, we will delete it at the end of our contract. Oh, I might want you to delete it before then. I might want to write in, actually, I want you to delete it after 30 days on a rolling 30 days. Depends what it is, right? And then disclosure. Who can they share the information with? So we have the inadvertent disclosure, the bus, the train, but we also have the intentional disclosure. I'm going to share it with my parent company. If I get a law enforcement request, I'm going to answer it, those sort of things. So we might want to write into our contract that you must not disclose it. You must not give it voluntarily to law enforcement. If you get a production order or court order, you need to redirect it to us wherever possible, because at the end of the day, it's your data, you're responsible for it. Okay, so we might want to write all these things into our contract to work through. Other things we might want to write in there about breach. You need to tell us that you're going to, if you have a breach, you need to tell us so that we can start our 72 hours and we can analyze, is it serious harm? And the person doing the breach notification to the commissioner, if required, or the customers or staff, will be your organisation, not the third party, because they are just holding it because you asked them to. So we can write all these things into our contracts. That's great. However, we most probably, if it's going to be quite high risk in terms of what data they've got, might want to go further than the contract. We might actually want to maybe actually get some evidence that these things are happening. Maybe we want to enforce privacy training with their staff. Maybe we want to do an annual attestation that they confirm that they haven't done any of these things we told them to do, or these things we did tell them to do. Or maybe you even want to go as far as auditing them. Okay. It needs to be risk-based though. You cannot do this for every single third party. So you need to think from a privacy perspective, what is a high risk third party? I want to do a lot more due diligence on that one than a low risk one. The higher risk ones might be based on sensitivity of information, quantity of information. Is it one record they've got or your whole database? What level of access have they got? Okay, so do they actually have it, but it's encrypted? Well, cool, they can't do much with it then. Or do they have full read access to whatever you've got, or full access to wander around your building unescorted? We then think also quite often about what is their history, right? Are they a really trusted brand entity who's never had privacy problems and is squeaky clean? I think of organizations like Microsoft into that category. Or are they a brand new startup? This thing is free and my inner feelings just feel like there's something off. Then I'm going to want to do more of an assessment on it. Okay. And again, horses for courses on what you're going to do about those third parties. Perfect. So those are the three elements of privacy risk we're going to talk about today. I'm going to hand over to you guys for any questions. If you want to pop them in the Q&A, that would be great.